Hello, David. Hello, Christopher. So today we have another episode of We Talk to CTOs. Today we have David, CTO for public sector in MuleSoft. I met him on Dreamforce. We had a very interesting talk about how to verify someone's driver's license and much more. But David, maybe you introduce yourself a couple of minutes shortly.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Johann, and glad to be here with Christopher and you. So I'm Dave Egts, field CTO for public sector with MuleSoft. I live in Ohio in the United States, and my role is a global role. I talk with CIOs around the globe and CTOs to hear about what their challenges are and the problems that they're facing in the public sector world. And I share the stories and the success patterns that we observe at MuleSoft, and it also goes the other way too in terms of identifying areas for improving our own products and making sure that gets filtered back into our own products and make sure that MuleSoft's products are as easy to use by public sector as possible.
Maybe a couple of minutes from your side, Christopher. I think most people know you already, but what is that?
Yeah, 2 sentences. Christopher Rahm. I'm working for Capgemini Germany. I'm part there of our Salesforce practice. I'm the Salesforce CTO there, and I'm glad to talk to Dave and you today about public sector.
Good. So to set the stage for all people listening, Christopher and I, both come from Germany. We have probably the worst IT infrastructure possible. Even my mobile internet is getting worse year by year. It's not getting better. I can't apply for a driver's license online. I can't apply for anything online. Literally nothing.
We still have faxes. So whenever it comes to requirement to have like a fax, it's most likely within Germany.
Yeah, but we wanted to ask David. Let's start with the good news. We talked about something really interesting beforehand already. Is how a proper API endpoint can actually be a security improvement. David, maybe you share there again.
No, and that's the thing. It's with the like in the US we have the federal data strategy where there's this mandate where everybody's supposed to share all their data, have transparency, and it all sounds great, right? But the challenge is that a lot of the CDOs, chief data officers, don't want to share their data because they're afraid that it's going to get out and be used against them. Like even if they give it to another agency or make that data accessible to another agency, a security problem by one agency would cause a leakage, and the person that owns that data set will be the one that gets in trouble. So when you have something like an API, an application programming interface, instead of just like having one agency or even the private sector making that data set available, you could instead have an API endpoint where you're basically asking the API a question and then it gives you an answer back. So you don't have to get the entire data, the entire data set. So we, Johann, we're talking about driver's licenses with Dreamforce, right? It's like, imagine it's like the Department of Homeland Security wants to know if this person has a state driver's license for whatever reason, right? Instead of having access to the database and they're doing SQL queries and pulling all kind of stuff out, right? And maybe on the state end they inadvertently open it too much, to the public and all that, and data leaks and everything. Instead, you can have an API endpoint, right, where instead of providing all the data back about the person, you could just say, does Johann have a driver's license? And then the API call returns a Boolean, yes or no, right? True or false, right? That yes, he does. And then they move on, right? But no data gets leaked from that data set. So the data is shared, but it's also protected. The other thing that you could do is do things like rate limiting, where you could make sure that it's like, well, wait a minute, I have this, well, you could also do IP address restrictions, right? Where it's like, wait a minute, I have this IP address that is in a country outside the United States that is like really hitting the driver's license database API. I can rate limit that, right? And I can send alerts off, right? So like logging, monitoring, rate limiting. The other thing is authentication as well. So, you could authenticate against it. You could have API credentials that, it's like not everybody can ask whether Johann has a driver's license, only these people that I give an API key to has that access, and they can centrally govern it. They can revoke it if, over age and over a period of time and all that. And it drives better security.
Is this, we talked about it, is this one of the ways how you convince chief data officers to actually start going to the cloud or sharing data?
Yeah, and that is something that they want to do, right? They want to meet the spirit of sharing the data, and they're in their title, they're data people, right? And for them to keep it to themselves is going to be somewhat self-limiting. And when they hear that they could use things like APIs to do that sort of data sharing and the governance, it opens up a lot of possibilities that that they never even thought of before. They may be thinking about sharing data within their agency, but I challenge them. It's like, what about other agencies? Instead of federal agencies, what about state and local agencies? Instead of them, what about the private sector, right? That wants to make queries and do like credit checks and things like that. That where you could make things much more efficient, like Christopher said about having more efficient government and getting away from fax machines and filling out paper forms and everything. If we could automate and integrate systems together between the private sector and public sector, that leads to a better citizen experience.
How do you actually manage then the knowledge within the public sector? So obviously one of those kind of myths is when you're talking or thinking about public sector is like always like, okay, they don't have like the appropriate skill set. Sometimes they are probably a little bit lazy, or it's really hard to find like the person who knows what you're actually talking about. So how do you address that?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I joke with people is it's like all I have to do is go up to a CIO and say workforce, and then step back, and they're going to have all kind of opinions about people retiring and attracting and retaining talent, and how do you enable people. And one of the things that from a MuleSoft standpoint, we have a thing called a C4E, a Center for Enablement. It's not a Center of Excellence, a COE, but a C4E, so Center for Enablement, where instead of it being this ivory tower that people go to and they get this wisdom and then they implement it for them and everything from the Center of Excellence, it's more of an outward-facing Center for Enablement to help teach people how to fish and how to do it properly. There's like one agency that is a great reference of ours is the USDA in the United States, U.S. Department of Agriculture, where they have a C4E.
Sorry, why is it that so many of random stories of excellence are out of the USDA? Somehow the USDA seems to be a very progressive agency, very innovative.
I'll make sure they get a copy of this video, so they're going to love it when we share it with other friends.
I mean, I like business history and I like also science, and so often the USDA comes up as a good example for progressive policies.
Yeah, but like with the USDA, they have monthly enablement sessions within the USDA that from a MuleSoft perspective, where they talk about it's like a show and tell user group sort of thing that they run themselves, and they had me come in and talk with them about where I see trends going and stuff like that. But I look at it too is that it was a quote from Toyota. There's no best, only better. And they're always improving. They're always looking for ways to improve themselves, and that they'll be the first to admit they're not perfect yet, but they realize that they need to always get better every day. And so it's not just like in the past. They had years ago, the USDA was made up of 29 like separate sub agencies, and each one of them had their own procurement. And it was a big mess. And then there's a new administration comes in, they clean it all up, and it's like, okay, we're going to have one set of tools, and they use MuleSoft to integrate all of those together. But those still there, you still have the org charts, right, of the different groups and everything. How do you build that culture of reuse, right? It's not just like, hey, I came up with an API. And this is where I tell people too, it's like you got to have a product mindset instead of a project mindset. Like I had the project where it's like you want an API, I gave you your API. You got to treat it like a product where you need to do marketing, right? You need to market your APIs to the other sub-agencies that are out there. Say, hey, look at this cool thing. You don't have to reinvent it yourself. You could reuse it. And that's part of their C4E that they do.
Sorry, I just see posters in the break room. Have you already heard about our fancy new AIs and stuff like that, and flyers about? But so you literally market APIs?
Yeah, no, you have to. And like how do you, and it's like I say marketing to a government person, they're gonna be like, who do you think we are? We're the government, right? We don't do marketing. It's like, yes, you do. It's like it's driving awareness, right? And again, it's part of the that product mindset of like, how do you like promote that product? The other thing that's cool about APIs is, we talk about modernization. If you're doing the governance and you're monitoring what APIs are being used, that allows you to identify who's using them, who do you need to market to that isn't using them that should be. The other thing is, from a modernization standpoint, you could identify where you want to put your modernization dollars. Like there may be an API that is being used all the time, but it could be improved from a performance tuning standpoint, right? There could be another API that nobody's using at all. And you may want to ask yourself, it's like, maybe I'm not marketing properly, or maybe it's outlived its usefulness. Maybe I should turn it off. And by turning it off, it does a couple good things. One is that you're retiring technical debt, right? The other thing is you're also, it's one less security vector that somebody can get in. It shrinks your attack surface, right, by preventing a hacker from getting in. And it also allows you to, take, instead of trying to like peanut butter, modernizing all your APIs and treating everybody equally, let's focus on the ones that need it the most, and we'll invest there and modernize them, and then retire the technical debt of the APIs that nobody uses anymore.
This makes so much sense. I never thought about it like that. You treat APIs a lot like modern websites are treated. It's completely different. So we had something we discussed before. I want to circle back a little bit. We look from a Salesforce architect perspective. Christopher, what is your experience on your journey to CTA about middleware? What changed in your thinking of middleware?
Obviously, also from not only from the CTA journey, potentially also from real life experiences, like in the latest years, and obviously with the MuleSoft acquisition by Salesforce, I observe it's way easier in terms of having the platform. So talking about the Salesforce platform, scalable and reliable. If I have something like a middleware in between, obviously then with MuleSoft as a kind of a natively choice in between. But thinking also then a way further is like how to integrate certain applications, like remote systems, how to bring data in. Not only like, is it possible? Yes, no. Also like different kind of use cases. Sometimes you have even like, we just talked about it before, it's like, hey, there's an IVR system, a telephony system I would like to integrate. Should I go for a direct integration into Salesforce, or should I utilize the ESB, so MuleSoft in between, just to keep like the performance and scalability, reach time mechanisms, all those things in a kind of a central place. And that's one thing you shouldn't underestimate as a kind of Salesforce architect, the kind of capabilities an ESB like MuleSoft can bring in.
I never thought from a stability point of view. Is that something customers as well see a middleware used for to stabilize the systems?
I mean, the one of those challenges, I guess, David, you can add much more use cases from your project experience and customer experience. What I see is obviously the challenge that you have potentially a lot of things going on the platform, like calculations, segmentations, things which happen there. And you need to think about how to bring in the data into Salesforce. The Salesforce architecture underneath is quite old. Obviously it was quite successful, but there's sometimes you hit certain limits, and we all know those kind of limits. And those who are actually on the CTA journey, they should keeping the numbers all in their mind. But when it comes down to the reality and the project implementations, obviously need to think about is like, how is like the easiest way to bring in data, and what is like then the easiest way to move forward on or within the Salesforce application. And thinking also like, I like what David said was like thinking it as a product, not only like a project. And that's also something very, very important. It's like potentially you just implement it now, but you don't implement it just for that specific project. You implement it as a kind of a product. And you obviously aim for utilizing it further on. And you need to think about what is like if the application scales. There are a lot of aspects you shouldn't underestimate in reality. And last but not least, obviously the effort. Integrating stuff with MuleSoft, and if you have the right expertise, it's way easier compared to potentially building up everything isolated within Salesforce.
Is this an angle, David? A good point. The effort, is this an angle your customers are actually looking at? MuleSoft just making it.
Yeah, and like just to emphasize what Christopher just said is that a lot of times people look at things from a project standpoint of I got to integrate this particular thing with Salesforce. That's my project. That's the problem I have to solve. And then they're going to do a direct integration. Then they're going to get the next project. Then it's another point-to-point connection. Then there's another one, right? And it may be the same software on the back end, but from a stability standpoint, like what Christopher said, one way to, the problem that you're going to have then is that what happens when a new version of that underlying endpoint changes, right? There's a new version of Oracle that comes out, or a new version of SAP or something, right? And then you need to refactor each one of those point-to-point connections. You got to test each one of those point-to-point connections. Whereas if you have, you again have to think ahead, right? And think about project number 2 and beyond, which is a culture shift, especially for the government. But if you could do an API and you can, and you do the Salesforce integration to an API that you're managing, and then it's hitting an endpoint that's SAP or Oracle or MySQL or SQL Server or something like that, right? Down the road, you could even do like you could shift things over where like a lot of times there's a trend to go with open source, which is still near and dear to my heart, right? I want to go from a proprietary database to an open source one, right? If I keep the interface the same, I can switch the database out underneath and nobody's going to know. Or it could almost be like a parallel sort of thing where it's like I do like, like how a lot of times like, the big internet companies, whenever they test out a new feature, they'll test out like, test out a new feature in an English speaking country that's smaller, that's lower risk. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. They could roll back. So an API call comes in, they could send 90% of the traffic to the time tested one, 10% to the new one. Maybe it's based on IP address, maybe it's just 90%, whatever. And then over time, it's like, oh, I want to shift it over to 1090 and then ultimately turn the other one off. But everything that's above that, all the applications that are calling that, nobody knows. And that's very different than all the point-to-point connections and technical debt that you build up with a project-based mindset.
I think one of the big hurdles for phased out rollout, at least from my Salesforce experience, was always actually the integrations, because we always had to almost switch them over in a big bang approach. I really love that, like thinking of, it's a product, it has features, and one of the features can be we can switch on and off integrations, we can do load balancing, we can even say failover. Like, oh yes, our SAP instance in Europe is just down, but worst case scenario for invoice creation, we can still call the American one. Shouldn't be long term, but worst case, we can do that. I mean, just as an example. So I had one more really, really important question here is, what team do I have to be in place for a proper integration? Because from my point of view, integration is still a very back-endy, let's say, hidden, but you make it seem like more like a software project with product owners or marketing, or what team do you see in place instead of like the usual 3 integration architects, which do a great job so far? Don't take me wrong, I have the highest respect for them, but what do you see there? A change in team composition?
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the product mindset, right? And thinking about like you actually have to have a product manager, right? Which is different from a program manager, which is different from a project manager, right? It's different, right? What they do is different. The other thing is, I look at it too, is it's a cross-functional sort of thing too. It's not that IT build it and everybody else is going to, on line of business, they're going to know about it and start using it. It's like having the stakeholders, a cross-functional team or a team of teams, to quote General Stanley McChrystal, where you have the line of business heavily influencing and you have the user stories and it's like, what problem am I trying to solve, right? And then the other part is I think about the leadership as well, of like encouraging the behavior of sharing, encouraging the product management behavior of like, how do you do the promotions? How do you promote the APIs with the line of business to encourage use? How are you doing metrics as well, right? And that's, I don't know about you guys, but it's like, just how do you measure success is something that is hard for a lot of people to do. Or is it the number of API calls? Is that success? Or what is an important API, right? It could be an API that's called very rarely, but if that goes down, or it's like a really important one, it's like, how do you measure what success looks like, and how do you prioritize things across your product portfolio?
The backup API for the backup telephony system can be of uttermost important and never be used.
Right. Yeah.
This can.
Yeah.
Good point there. Is that you said it's a cross-team requirement. Maybe I give it also to Christopher. Is from your day-to-day job, do business units already know the data that exists outside of their silo?
Yes and no, I would say. Consultancy answer. I'm sorry about that. So mainly what we observe is at least that there is some kind of knowledge around that something like an ESB and the middleware is existing and integration is much more easier. But obviously there's still this kind of in the kind of our day-to-day work, if you're talking about projects, they are still somehow afraid on, okay, it comes down to integration, and integration is always kind of
I'm also afraid of
linked together with kind of effort and kind of a 6 months project and a lot of testing, and it will never work at the end. Yes, vanilla cases, but when it comes down to edge cases, it's always like complicated, and that's a kind of a fear you need to break down, and especially I guess in terms of governance, yeah, and the public sector is like based on my experience when we talked about public sector projects, it's always like that they have like their long list of requirements you need to fulfill, and only if you can ensure, let's say, 99.99999% functionality, then you get the green lights and checkmark and the project goes live. And I guess this is like the challenging aspect when it comes down to building up integrations and providing services close it down to like step-by-step integrations and milestones, and in terms of MuleSoft and the specific APIs you can provide, the experience, the system APIs, and so on. So I guess this is like the main challenge when it comes down to data, to get a better understanding how this is built up, and then how to manage then the knowledge at the end on both sides.
David, you want to add something there from your point of view?
What he said is imperfectible. I couldn't make it better.
So it's the same. I have the same feeling that integration is still a topic that's not really agile ready. Is it the topic integration itself is not ready for edge? Integration sounds for me always like waterfall delay escalation meetings. This is kind of the words I have and long meetings where we talk about mapping data from A to B. David, does this change? Is it still the same, or what do you see there? A change in the project?
I would disagree about the waterfall part, because to me, I look at the integrations as like, I have this catalog, and like with MuleSoft, there are hundreds of connectors that are out of the box that MuleSoft provides to connect with SAP and MySQL and all these other things that are out there. And so, we always talk about the Lego brick approach of taking the modules, and as people want to get to more of a microservices architecture, the connectors and the APIs that MuleSoft provides are really a good way to get away from that big bang monolith that you would develop with waterfall to something that is way more modular and reusable and repluggable, right? It's like, I want to change out the one Lego brick with another Lego brick. It's more from an agile philosophy standpoint, much more closely aligned.
So you say this whole MuleSoft, we call it a clicky bunty, the whole admin friendly, business user friendly, also the pre-built connectors. This actually makes agile integration projects possible.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, and that's where even from a not even agile, but like from like using things like Flow and MuleSoft Composer, you could make API calls like right from Flow within Salesforce to something that an API developer created for you. And to me, I think that's really exciting too, because that enables like how Chris said, it's like it's so hard to attract and retain talent, especially to the private sector. If you can empower the line of business people to do clicks and not code, that is going to make them way more efficient, and it's also going to free up the pro code developer to make more Lego bricks to give to the line of business to snap together to build applications.
So as a product owner, integration layer, I would even already create integration bricks, maybe even on not only on demand, but I'm a service provider. I come up with innovative APIs, maybe endpoints. Okay, this is really interesting. It really changes my mind. I wonder, Christopher, has any of your customers approached integration layer like that already? Or is it still a tool to be used?
I mean, we're working on that. we're working on that. So obviously, it really depends also on the legacy systems and how you can actually how performant are those kind of remote systems. You actually want to fetch out data, certain information you actually need in your, or you're aiming for to have them available in your Salesforce instance. That's obviously one of those kind of challenges. But having like a lean integration architecture underneath is getting more and more important. So as David mentioned before, is like with like the ability to turn off integrations at some point. Thinking further, there's also like turning off remote systems, and that's really like a challenge. We have all those, and I guess you all have the experience. We saw that kind of legacy applications with tons of systems like 20, 30, 40, even like 50, 60 years old. And there's sometimes reasons why they didn't turn it off. And then integration gets more and more important, because you need to think about how to connect to those kind of systems and how you make the information still available. And at some parts, and it's kind of necessary, and how to manage that in a kind of a scalable way will get more and more important.
And you, Chris, David said before in our pre-call, you said something, you don't always replace the existing middleware, if there's one. Maybe just build your MuleSoft on top of the existing one. What's the advantage of doing it this way?
So one of the advantages, maybe you can add then on that. What we see is within the field that the connection is working in that particular way, that you have your Salesforce instance, utilizing MuleSoft as the system to actually call in and bring in data in, or retrieving data through that related remote systems. But you potentially still have like an integration layer in between, which is then potentially managing like the integrations to all the kind of other existing legacy systems, because the integration layer was already built in the past. But you still have the advantage with that kind of connection from ESB to another integration layer, that everything is getting more easier in terms of like how to bring in certain things into Salesforce, because maybe the old integration layer or the old system which is potentially involved doesn't have the capability like breaking up APIs in a particular way. So that is obviously a huge advantage what MuleSoft is actually delivering, that you can break up APIs and deliver it in a kind of much more easier way in terms of, if you're thinking in terms of a microservice architecture.
Yeah, and to add, it's like a lot of times too, it's like, government agencies are going to have tons of technical debt, right? That you're never going to refactor all of it overnight. So so in some cases it's like, okay, so where do we get started? And a lot of the government folks are relieved that it's like, no, we don't need to do a rip and replace of a legacy system with another one. Let's put an API in front of it that we'll call the legacy system. And then in parallel, once that's created and we create that insulation layer from the calling applications, I could be working on that new version and then be able to retire it and change the connection point to the new application and without breaking all the other applications. And the benefit there is that there isn't that like, hey, let's come in on Saturday night and flip the switch and hope that it all works, right? It's something that you could do and hopefully nobody notices.
This is a really good point. Okay, we only have 2 more minutes left. Before we wrap it up, we have to address the important point: data cloud and AI. David, MuleSoft. Why do I still need MuleSoft if I have data cloud today? I just did the data cloud certification. It can connect all these Salesforce. It has pre-built connectors. It can do even a little bit data transformation. David, what do I need MuleSoft for?
Yeah, so 2 things. One is that there are, like, data cloud has the pre-built connectors, right? That are ready to go, just like you said. But my guess is that you have way more other systems than the pre-built connectors that are provided with data cloud. And with MuleSoft, we have hundreds of pre-built connectors. You could also build your own connectors, right? Which could plug into data cloud as an API call, right? And then what that does, that helps with making a richer AI grounding for your prompts and richer AI and better insights and everything. The other thing that's coming out of data cloud is that you may use data cloud to harmonize your data and have that single view of a customer or constituent, but still the data sources that you have on the back end may not be getting cleaned up, right? So so what you could do is you could actually have MuleSoft coming out of it to go and clean up your data sources as well. And then the other thing that you could do is have data cloud, based upon things that happen inside of data cloud. You could use things like Salesforce Flow or Composer to trigger actions to do automations that on behalf of a user to automate processes to make them more efficient.
Okay. And you mentioned a good point, because from our Salesforce perspective, there's like, we are the center of the universe. There's like 5 systems in every system landscape. But you mentioned at the beginning, we are usually just one of many, many systems. Salesforce is just a small part of all the data. Why do I need an integration layer in the age of AI with all these other systems? What is the advantage of having that?
Yeah, so the key with having the data sources is that, like, if you're using something like Einstein for sales or service or things like that, if you're only tapping your CRM system for your source of data and grounding a prompt with that, the richness of the response, it'll be good, but it could be better, right? It could actually, by integrating your data sources using MuleSoft into your AI prompts, what it can do is you can not just connect your CRM system and your marketing system, but you could connect your ERP system. You can connect your logistics and shipping system. You can connect your payment system. And so that's the one part. So that's a part that goes into your AI model. The other part is the part that's coming out in terms of the automation and the actions.
I never thought about it, of course, because we always think so Salesforce centric, but stuff, maybe the outcome is, I don't know, the credit score changes. Maybe the outcome is we want to ship a free package. We don't always want to go through Salesforce to ship the new package.
Right, exactly. And the other thing too is that there has been no winner declared in the AI wars that are going on right now, right? And so the benefit of having an API layer is that you could be using something like OpenAI today, harnessing all that innovation that's out there, but down the road, there could be a new model that comes out from Anthropic or somebody else, or like in the case of Azure, there's Azure OpenAI, and it actually is FedRAMP certified and runs on their government cloud. So if you have everybody using the API calls that you govern yourself, you could swing the endpoint to something that is certified for your region, and you could take advantage of all that innovation that's going out there, but minimizing the disruption to the business layer on top.
This is a very good, but I think with that we can wrap it up. David, if you want to give us Salesforce architects one last homework we should do, should we all learn MuleSoft basics?
Of course, yes, they should. And actually, there are actually some Trailhead courses that are brand new that are hands-on with MuleSoft, where like Yeah, like if you're used to doing, like, the thing I love in Trailhead is the hands-on courses where, you know, I learned by doing and making mistakes and having it blow up spectacularly. Now we've added some hands-on MuleSoft courses that people could try out.
And Christopher, from your last sentences from your side?
I just need to go on Trailhead now.
Yeah, me too. I'm already searching for it. David, thank you very much. I will stop the recording now. Thanks for taking the time. And you are available on LinkedIn. If someone finds you in any conference, I can highly recommend talking self integration strategies for hours. Thanks.